All right, here we go. Sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with my iPad. It was not working properly. So that's the second time I've tried to use it for this, and it's messed up. I mean, I've had some good success with it, but today it's not working properly. So anyway, let's get going. I'm doing it on my phone. It should work well. I got people watching. I hope everyone can hear me. Maybe just give a comment if you can't hear me. I think you can see me. Just give me a thumbs up, somebody, if you can hear me, if the volume's working, and then I'll get started. Anyone give me a thumbs up? Okay, well, I'm gonna go and hope that it's working. People will. Yes, you can hear me. Perfect. Okay, let's go. Sorry for the delay. Okay, so this is the fourth installment, I guess you call it, of tracking your board straight without having to change sides, right? Like paddling on one side and still tracking your board straight. And in the first video, we looked at weight distribution between your feet side to side and also front to back. And that was important because in the first board tracking tool that I introduced to you, it was paddling close to the rail. And all paddling close to the rail did it minimized the turning effect that each stroke had, right? So it meant that we were squared up like this, out over the water with our paddling side shoulder, with our head, with our top hand. Our top shoulder was sort of stacked above our bottom shoulder. But our weight was distributed evenly between our 2 feet, so we were running a level board. All right? And that allowed us to paddle closer to the center line of the board, which minimized the turning effect of each stroke. The second skill that I showed you last time involved leaning the board. And that involved taking weight, instead of having it evenly distributed between your left and your right foot, it meant that you weighted the opposite rail. So you put more weight on the opposite side foot, the non-paddling side foot, or the inside the board compared to your paddle side foot. Okay, so we talked about how the easiest way to do that was, instead of keeping your weight balanced even between 2 feet, it was just kind of thrust your hip out to one side, kind of straighten that inside leg a little bit, and put more weight on it. It's like being too cool for school in the schoolyard, where instead of standing with weight on both feet, you kind of put all the weight on one foot, right? And when you get tired of standing like that, you kind of shift, you put all the weight in the other foot, right? You're doing the same thing. Okay, you're just putting weight over onto one foot, and that weights the opposite rail. Weighting the opposite rail on a displacement board causes the board to turn, to the opposite side. So if you weight the left rail, the board turns to the right. If you weight the right rail, the board turns to the left. It's unlike a surfboard, a skateboard, or a snowboard, where you weight the rail of the direction you want to turn in, right? It's opposite to that. So unless you're standing in the back of the board, but that's surfing, and we won't get into that today. So if I'm paddling on the right, which I think to you in the camera looks like the left. I discovered that when I was looking at one of the videos the other day, but I'm on the right. So if I'm paddling on the right and I weight the opposite rail, the left rail, that's going to help me turn my board towards my paddle, okay? And so if I'm doing that and paddling close to the rail, it's going to really help me turn the board to the paddle. And I can even, and I showed you guys this, when you weight the opposite rail, what it does is it tilts the board. So the whole board goes from being level to tilts to the opposite side, and that makes it a little bit easier for your paddle blade to go under the board. So you can, because it sort of exposes the underside of your board on the paddling side. So what you can do is weight the opposite rail, and you can go, when you, instead of just paddling close to the rail, you can actually go out and you can paddle under the rail, and you can go under the rail through the stroke, paddling much closer to the center line of the board. And that really helps you turn towards the paddle too. So if you're doing those two things, you should be able to track your board straight in neutral conditions. You should be able to get some strokes in on the what would it be? It would be on the on the upwind side if you're paddling in a side wind, right? So it should help you for tracking your board straight. But there's one other tool that's really powerful that we haven't talked about yet, and that's using the blade face to actually pull the nose towards the paddle when you're putting the paddle in the water. And I think it's probably the most effective of the three. It's the only one that works when you're paddling slowly. We'll talk about it in a second, but you learn it basically standing still in calm water on your board. And when you use that, especially when you use it in conjunction with the two skills I've shown you, paddling close or under the rail and weighting the opposite rail, it basically allows you to do, if you're good at it and you practice, to do anything. You can paddle indefinitely on one side without having to change sides. You can turn to the paddling side without having to change sides. You can do a lot of things, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But let me just show you what I mean by paddling, by using the blade face to control your board. So I'm just going to use this book here as an example. That would be the side of my board, right? And that is my paddle normally when it goes in the water. It's perpendicular to the side of the board. And that means that all the forces are directed back. Like the water gathers in the face of the blade, and as I pull, all the force is directed back. Well, some is directed down because I grab with a positive angle. So some of it's directed downward, which lifts the board, but the rest is directed straight back. And that is going to help the board move forward a maximal distance every stroke. To go fast, you want to be catching the water with your blade perpendicular to the rail of the board, okay? So this is the board lying flat. We're looking at it from above, right? And this is the blade as seen from above, and it's perpendicular, okay? This is the blade face. That's the back of the blade. So we're concerned what the blade face is doing when it goes in the water. So I'm going to get the book up again, and that's going to be my board. So when we want to pull our board or steer our board to the paddling side, what we do is we enter the water. Instead of having a perpendicular blade, when we enter, we open the blade face to the board. So it's open a little bit to the board, okay? Now just think about it. It's going to have water gathered on the blade face, so it's going to be working against water that's gathered here on the blade face, okay? So when you work against the water there, what's it going to do to the board? It's going to pull the board a little bit towards the paddle, right? Because it's working against the water in this direction. It's going to pull the board in that direction. So it's going to draw the nose towards the paddle. It's like a draw stroke. So some of you, if you have a canoeing background, you know that a draw stroke is where you turn the blade kind of sideways to the board and pull water, and it pulls the board towards the paddle, right? Or the canoe or the boat or whatever it is that you're paddling. So it's the same idea as that. And it just involves opening your blade face a little bit from perpendicular to just opening it a little bit. So here's the board over here, and it's open to the board. And just at the front of the stroke, entering the water, so entering, gathering water, bearing the blade and pulling with the blade like open, and then turning it and running it perpendicular back through for the rest of the stroke. And it's just enough to draw the nose to the paddle. Okay, so I'm going to stand back up again, and I'm going to get back on the board that I've drawn on my floor here, and I'm just going to show you what that looks like. Okay, so instead of the blade going in square like that, okay, square is perpendicular to the midline of the center line of the board, we're going to open it up so that it's a little bit open to the board. Okay, so we've just turned the blade face so that it's open to the board. This is called open to the board, where the blade face is facing the board, right? That would be closed to the board because it's not facing the board. This is the way you want to work your paddle if you want to push the nose of your board that way. So if you want to increase the turning effect of every stroke, you could turn your blade that way, and you could kind of sweep away from the side of the board, and the board would turn that way quickly. But we want to know how to track our board straight without having to change sides. So we want to pull the nose of the board towards the paddle a bit. So all we're going to do, instead of entering the water with our blade's still squared up in terms of our top hand being over our bottom hand, but our blade is not square in terms of being perpendicular to the midline of the board. The blade face is open to the board a bit, okay? And all we're doing when we go in the water is we gather a little water and we pull with the blade face open. It pulls the nose towards the paddle, and then as we start to pull, our blade goes perpendicular to the center line of the board, and we continue to pull our stroke, okay? And so what we're doing is at the front of the stroke, as we're gathering water, we're pulling the nose of the board to the blade, and then we're just pulling the board forward. And if we're using that skill, if we're using our blade face, that should go a long way towards just helping us keep our board running straight. Now, some people will say that if your blade face is open to the board and drawing the nose a little bit as it's gathering water in the blade, that it's less powerful than a blade that's square. And so it's going to cause you to go slower. And that's true to a very, very small degree. But I guess the thing that negates that theory is that it's also slower to not go in a straight line, right? The fastest way to get between 2 points is in a straight line. And if you're constantly having your board running to the opposite side, you're going to be zigzagging, right? And that's going to be, as you're traveling, down the race course, that's going to be slower. The other thing is that for most people, changing sides slows you down. They're either too slow in the change, or they get the paddle over quickly, but that first stroke is not a full stroke or fully weighted stroke, and so the board loses a little bit of speed when they change sides. So my experience has been that occasionally drawing the nose to just pull it over just as you start to detect that it's wandering, making a couple of strokes adjustment by drawing the nose to the paddle, and then the rest of your strokes, the blade can be squared up and pulling for maximal power. Making those occasional adjustments slows the board down less than zigzagging or changing sides does. Okay, so it's a net gain by doing this. Now, that's just using the blade face to draw the nose over, okay? If you had to make a bigger correction, you could, remember we've learned 3 skills now. You could weight the opposite rail while you open the blade face to the board and draw the nose. And that's going to make the steering correction more powerful, and it's going to correct the board wandering, or the nose wandering to the opposite side. It's going to bring it back to straight more quickly. And of course, when you're doing this, you're paddling close to the rail. Remember, just look at the position I'm in now. I'm squared up, right? I'm going to paddle close to the rail. My blade is going in. The side of my blade here is hugged right up against the side of my board up front. And then as I pull, as I bury it, as I start to pull, and as the board widens, my paddle blade is now underneath the board, or half of my paddle blade is underneath the board, and it's the shaft of my paddle that's just kissing along the side of the board, just a millimeter away from the side of the board. So I'm pulling as close to the side of the board as I can, negating the turning effect of my stroke, and then I'm adding, at the front of the stroke, just a little bit of open blade face to pull the nose to the paddle, okay? And then if I want to add to that, then I can take my weight and move it from being equally distributed between my left and my right foot. I can weight the opposite rail, put a little bit more weight on my inside foot, lean my board, and now it's going to turn even more quickly to the paddling side. So those are the 3 skills that you use, and that's the combination that you use them in. And what you can do is you can get on your board in flat, calm water, close to shore, like at the dock or just off the beach, as long as the water's deep enough to do things with your paddle. Flat water, no wind, so the board's not going to be caught by the wind and be blowing all around, because it'll be hard to convince yourself that this works. So glassy, still, flat water, and just take your paddle and just put it in the water, close to the nose of the board, or close to the rail of the board, and just put it in with the blade open like that, okay? Can you everyone see that my blade is open? All right, just put it in with my blade open, and just simply pull a little bit and close your blade, or turn your blade so it's perpendicular. Just do that motion. So gather water, like catch and bury, and as you're burying, just pull a little bit and turn your blade perpendicular to the midline of the board. So go from open blade face, bury and perpendicular. Open blade face, bury and perpendicular. That's all you have to do. And you will see your nose, every stroke that you take, move, 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 move to the paddling side. And because you're not moving anywhere, the only movement is going to be your nose moving towards the paddle. It's going to move almost like the hand of a clock, right? Just around the circle. And that should be enough to convince you that this is a really powerful tool if you can do that when you're paddling in a straight line, paddling hard. Couple of things to look for when you're doing this. You don't want to be doing it way away from the boat or from the board, okay? So some people, what they do is I've seen them when they're learning this, they don't want to pull right up against the rail of the board. I think they're a little bit reluctant to put weight on their blade because when your blade is going in perpendicular like that, it's going to take more weight than if your blade is going in a little bit on an angle like that. People are afraid that their blade is going to slice like that through the water. And so they're a little bit reluctant to put weight on their blade. You'll get used to that. Remember, we're not opening our blade to the board a lot. Like, it's not this kind of thing. It's a very slight opening like that. Okay? So slightly open. Just enough to draw the nose a little bit. All right? And but you want to do it as close as possible to the rail of the board, because if you start doing it out there and you're trying to draw the nose in by taking like a big draw stroke way out to the side of your board, you're no longer moving your board in a straight line, right? You're not paddling down the rail and propelling your board forward maximally every stroke. So you're missing speed. The second thing is that even if you're not just draw stroking, but you're doing the opening blade face and then burying it and turning it perpendicular, but you're pulling further from the nose from the side of the board. So you're pulling way out from the side of the board. Well, now you're pulling a greater distance from the center line of the board. And if you're pulling a greater distance from the center line of the board, you're increasing the turning effect to the opposite side of your stroke, right? So to do this skill, we don't want to throw out the things that we talked about in the last couple of videos. Primarily, minimizing the turning effect every stroke by keeping the blade as close, traveling as close to as it possible to the middle line of the board, or the axis, the long axis of the board through the stroke, okay? So that's really paramount. We can't throw that out. We can't lose track of that, but we just want to open our blade face a little bit so we draw the nose. Now, in most cases, that should be enough of a correction. So you start your stroke, and I'll do this with the book again. So you start your stroke with the blade like that, and as you bury, it goes perpendicular to the midline of the board. So starts with an open blade face, it buries and goes perpendicular, okay? And that should be enough to pull your nose to the paddle. But in certain cases, you may be required to do a bigger correction. And one of the scenarios is if you actually have a turn in your course. Where I paddle at home, when we paddle on the river, it's a pretty windy river, and it's not windy on the scale of Chattajack, which is the Tennessee River is this huge river where a bend is 5 miles around. These bends are like 500 meters around, so they're much tighter. And so a lot of the time I'll be paddling, say I'm paddling on the right and the river's bending to the right. And so I don't necessarily want to do the whole bend paddling on the left, so I'll paddle on the left for some of it, but then I'll switch back to the right, and I'll use my steering skills to follow the shore, turning to the right as I paddle along, and I'm not losing much speed to speak of. And one of the things that I can do if I need to make a big correction to do that, and another time you might need to make a big correction, is if you wait too long to pick up or to correct the board wandering to the opposite side, right? We talked last time about how the board will start to gain speed in wandering away from straight, right? Like it starts very slowly to wander to the opposite side, but the longer you wait, the quicker it's starting to go in the other direction. So if you wait too long, you've got a big steering correction to make too, right? So if you're turning to the right and when you're paddling the right, or if you waited too long to recognize that your board started running to the left and you want to bring it back to the right, then you're going to have to make a bigger steering correction. And the 3 skills that I've shown you in combination may not be enough, and you might have to juice up the using the blade face a little bit, okay? So right now we talked about using the blade face, starting open to the board, and then as you pull, going perpendicular almost right away, right? I'll do it down here. Hopefully you can see it. I can't really tell because that's where the comments are when I'm looking at my phone, so you're starting with an open blade face, you're drawing the nose as you bury it, and then you're going perpendicular and pulling perpendicular down the board, right? That's what we're doing normally. But if you want to juice up or increase the effect of this blade face work, then what you can do, there's 2 things you can do. And I usually will do them a bit of both. The first is that you can weight the opposite rail more, right? Because most people are only going to have weighted it a little bit. So you can really stand on that opposite rail and really get the side up a little bit more. And that's going to allow you to go underneath the board a bit more. Okay, so now you're paddling closer to center on the board, and your board's tilted more, and this tree's falling on me. Okay, stay. Okay, where was I? You weighted the opposite rail more, and you paddle underneath the board more, so your blade was pulling closer to center on the board. That's going to work wonders. But you can also increase the amount that you're doing with the blade face. And in that case, rather than having the blade draw the nose and then go perpendicular, keep it open to the board through the stroke. Okay, and that's going to continue. It's most effective closest to the front of the board. That's where it's going to do most of its pulling. It's really hard to pull the front of the board over from the middle of the board. But if you've got a deep, powerful stroke and you're underneath the board with your paddle and you're weighting the opposite rail and you paddle with that blade open longer through the stroke, it's going to get more bite and it's going to turn you even more to the paddling side. Okay, so again, it's usually in most cases all you need to do is do it up front and then go perpendicular. But in real extreme cases, and especially when you're weighting the opposite rail and leaning out over the water so you can get the blade underneath the board more, you can leave the blade open and pull longer with the blade open rather than perpendicular to the center line of the board. And that's going to cause you to turn even more quickly to the paddling side. Okay, so that's how to increase the effect of that. A couple of other things I see people do that are problematic is in order to control the blade face, they start doing funny things with their top hand. Like they won't be in their normal paddling position. They will be in, they'll sort of won't get over as much. And I think it's just because they're looking at their paddle more and they start to, really try to control their top hand. And they'll start to bend their elbow more, and all of a sudden they're way out of position for productive paddling, right? So you want to do all of this kind of stuff with the same motion that you would do for normal, efficient forward paddling. And so all you're doing really to control the blade face is nothing should change at your elbow in your top arm. Nothing should change So that angle shouldn't change. And nothing should change in your bottom hand. Like you're not controlling it with your wrist on your bottom hand. Okay? What you're doing is you're simply turning the paddle with your wrist on your top hand, and you're letting the paddle spin in your bottom hand. So you can see the paddle is spinning in my bottom hand. See, it's just spinning in my bottom hand. And all that's being controlled by this with my top hand. Okay? So my top arm is the same angle it always is at the elbow. My bottom hand, I still have that kind of relaxed grip where my top 3 fingers are pretty snug around the paddle, but they're not gripping crazy, like they're snug. And that my pinky is around the paddle only like that much, right? And so it's a loose grip. It's not like a real strong grip, so that my arm can be relaxed. And it's just like I was talking about a few videos back when we're looking at land drills. My arm is a connector. I'm not, and my upper body even is a connector, trying to connect what I've got gathered on the water to the big muscles in my hips and my legs. I'm not making a conscious effort to really try to pull with my upper body. So my grip doesn't change, but my top hand just moves to control. I don't know if you can see that. It's hard for me to see on the little screen on my phone, but that's where the movement's coming from, just with my wrist. So I just turn my wrist a little bit, and really, all you're doing with your wrist is you're going from I don't know if you can see it, but there's where it is normally to get it square. It's a little bit, just a little bit turned, like a little bit flexed. A little bit flexed right there to get the blade square, just a little bit. And all you're doing to get the blade more open is you're just turning your hand like that. And now the blade's more open. So that's more open, that's normal. If, this is totally off topic, but when we're looking at grips, I don't know how many of you hold the paddle. I can show you this. Taking out my paddle in the ceiling here. Okay, I'm going to take, don't get vertigo here, I'm going to take the phone out of the thing, and I'm going to try to show you my grip. Okay, how many of you hold your paddle like that? Can you see that, where your hand is totally over the grip like that? Can you see that? Okay, if you're holding the paddle like that, then to get the blade to be square, you've got to have your wrist cocked at a bit of an angle, so that right here to right there, you can see how it's cocked, and that could create some tension on the outside of my forearm there, right? And then to get the blade open to the paddling side, I just turn it like that a little bit, and you can see the blade's open. Okay, but I've never held my paddle like that. I'm going to try to show you here. I hold my paddle, put my paddle down for a second. I hold my paddle, you see in your hand, you've got like a lifeline, right? So I'm going to put this down and try to show you. You've got your lifeline that kind of runs like that, right? Okay, I'm going to try to put my blade like that across my hand. Okay, so it's going to go across my hand like that, my handle. And that means that, so I'm going to try to insert my paddle in there like that. So instead of being like, I'm sorry guys, this is hard to see. Like instead of being under my, like the handle being lined up just beneath my knuckles, it's like that. Okay, so it's closest to my the base of my finger,
on my index finger, and it's furthest from the base of my finger on my pinky, instead of being right at the base of all my fingers. Okay, and I don't know whether you can see that. But if you have your hand like that all the time when you're paddling, if you hold your paddle like that, then you can see that my hand, my arm, is in a nice relaxed position on the paddle, and the paddle blade is square, which is where I want it to be all the time. And then to open it, I just turn it. I'm just going to turn it a little bit more, right? But it's square. Instead of being 90% of the time being like that, like that to get it square, all right? I don't know how well you can see this. I'm going to put the phone back. I'm going to put the phone back here. Sorry if I've given everyone vertigo. But I just find, like, if I'm holding the paddle like that, I can't really see from here. Try it like this. That's not going to work. If I'm holding the paddle like that, instead of like that, that's not really helping you. Okay, well, I'll try to find a way to show that in another video. But basically, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to eliminate a lot of tension at this part in my right there by having to turn the paddle like that all the time to paddle with my blade square, and then opening it up like that, opening the blade face by going like that. Okay, but that's how I'm controlling the paddle with my top hand, and I'm just letting it spin in my bottom hand. So again, just to review, 90% of the time you're like tucked up close to the rail, but if you want to draw the nose, you just open the blade face just a little bit, use your top hand to do it, just a little bit, grab some water. As you're gathering water and bearing, you're pulling the nose to the paddle, and then the blade turns and pulls the rest of the stroke with the blade perpendicular to the midline of the board, and the blade face would be neutral, no longer open and not closed. Okay, if that makes sense. That's going to draw the nose, and in extreme cases you can leave the blade open through the rest of the stroke, but you would definitely be using to the maximum the other skills that I showed you, which you'd really be leaning the board, and you would be paddling under the board, okay, as opposed to just paddling along the side of along the rail. So that's steering using the blade face, or steering by drawing the nose, and it's a great steering tool. I would really like you to try it in calm, flat water with no wind, and don't try pulling full strokes. Just simply put the blade in, and as you're bearing it, put it in open to the board, and then just turn it perpendicular as it's bearing. Open to the board, and then turn it perpendicular as it's bearing. And that little tiny bit, you should see the board nose being pulled to the paddle each time you do it, right? So in a normal stroke, you'd be doing that, and then following it up with the rest of your stroke. And that's basically how using the blade face to draw the nose works. All right, give me some comments on how bad you got out of, you got disoriented or got vertigo or whatever by the way when I spun the camera around. But let me know if you were able to see what I was saying with the grip, your top hand grip. Let me know if you'd like me to try to explore that in a future post and find a better way to describe it. Maybe I need somebody filming it for me while I'm demonstrating it. But also let me know over the next little while. Like, don't just look at the video and then stop watching it and go and do your thing. Watch the video, go do your thing, trying this, and then come back and let me know how it worked. Because sometimes the first effort of trying it is good, but there's some things that you can, maybe had trouble with, and if you let me know what they are, maybe I can troubleshoot them with you a little bit and help you, maybe do it better so that it works even better the next time. This is a type of thing that takes some practice. it's remember I grew up paddling in a sprint canoe, which meant I paddled on the right the whole time, and we could not change sides in our boats, and so that meant that I had to learn to do a lot of things with my paddle. I had to learn how to use the blade face an awful lot to control my boat, and so doing these things on the right on a stand-up paddleboard is super natural and super easy to me. On the left it's more difficult. I've gone from being not even able to paddle on the left, or not being able to paddle in rough water on the left, to being pretty good on both sides now. But I'm still better at controlling the fine motor skills involved in doing this, especially controlling the blade face. I'm still better on the right than the left. And most of you are going to have one side that you feel better on than the other, just because most of us aren't ambidextrous, right? We have better fine motor control if we're right-handed if we're right-handed, or left-handed if we're left-handed. So you will find one side feels better to you than the other. My suggestion would be, A, don't worry about that because it's normal. But my suggestion would be, B, get it down really well on the side that you feel better on, that you feel more coordinated on. Be able to do it really, really, really well. And once you can do that, then you've become basically an expert at controlling your board, and then you can start to figure out how to do the same thing that you do well on your strong side on your weaker side, right? And be patient with it, because like most things in this sport, you don't get expert at it overnight. It takes a little bit of time to be able to do these things well. And I guess the last thing I would say is, give yourself a chance to be successful. Like, set yourself up to be successful. Don't go out in really choppy water and try this. Don't go out in raging side winds and try this and expect to suddenly be able to, keep your board tracking straight and paddle equally on both sides in a big side wind. That's a big ask for even, the best at it. Try to find the calmest, glassiest water that you can find, and do it there first, and get really good at it in those kind of conditions, and then gradually, by degree, challenge yourself with more difficult conditions, and that's the pathway to take, and stick with it. But it does make things a lot easier, because if you can paddle indefinitely on one side, it gives you a huge advantage. If you can do that, you should be able to paddle in strong crosswinds, and if not paddle equally on both sides, certainly be able to get productive strokes in on the upwind side, right? Which is the side that is the side that people don't paddle on. They don't paddle on the upwind side in a big crosswind. Usually they have to do all their strokes in the downwind side to keep their nose turning into the wind. And if you can get these skills down really well, you should be able to at least take some productive strokes on the upwind side, which will allow you, you're not going to get as fatigued, because you won't get just destroyed by paddling on one side all the time in the side wind. All right, so let me know how you make out, please, in the comments. Like, come back a few days from now, comment, let me know how it went, and ask questions. I'll answer them, and I'll think of something to talk to you about next, because this, you know what, we'll go one more thing on tracking the board straight, and I'll just explain a couple of drills that you can do using all these skills, and give you something that you can challenge yourself with on your steering skills, okay? And then I'll get into something else. I'm thinking, would people like to hear some tips about stability? Because I'd be happy to talk about them. I was thinking of doing them next. Anyway, stay safe, everybody. Hope that you're making out okay. Hope people are getting back in the water. Hope that the weather is getting warmer where you live, and that it's more inviting to go paddling. And I'm sure that we'll be back in the water soon, and hopefully, having a normal summer, at least the way in terms of paddling training. Maybe not racing, but paddling training. So all the best, and I will see you again probably next Tuesday. Later.